true flesh, the nature of the spiritual body in the Gospel of Philip. Welcome to Pleroma Pathways, Apocalyptic and Mystic Christianity, where we explore esoteric and apocalyptic texts. The Gospel of Philip presents a profound teaching on the nature of the resurrection body. It describes the body of the risen Christ as true flesh, distinguishing it from our current flesh, which is only an image of the true. This study will explore the meaning of true flesh and incorporate insights from a 19th century writer on the nature of the spiritual body. The Gospel of Philip on the true flesh. The Master was conceived from what is imperishable, through God. The Master rose from the dead, but he did not come into being as he was. Rather, his body was completely perfect. It was of flesh, and this flesh was true flesh. Our flesh is not true flesh, but only an image of the true. Gospel of Philip 69. This passage contrasts the body of the risen Christ with the earthly bodies that humans currently possess. It states that Jesus' post-resurrection body was completely perfect, a transformed, incorruptible state. This body is called true flesh, implying that the flesh of mortals is only a shadow or image of the real glorified body. The phrase, conceived from what is imperishable, affirms that Jesus' resurrection body was no longer subject to corruption. Unlike ordinary flesh, which is perishable and tied to mortality, true flesh is incorruptible and fully aligned with the divine. This transformation aligns with Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians 10:53, where he states, "This corruptible must put on incorruptibility, and this mortal must put on immortality." Paul emphasizes that the resurrection involves a fundamental change. The body that rises is not identical to the current perishable body, but is a perfected spiritual body. This aligns with the Gospel of Philip's statement that Jesus' risen body was not as he was before. The spiritual body, insights from a 19th century writer. A 19th century writer offers additional commentary on the nature of the true flesh and the spiritual body. Now, a spiritual body is as material or corporeal and tangible, a body as that which we now possess. It is a body purified from the law of sin and death. Hence it is termed holy and spiritual, because it is born of the spirit from the dust, is incorruptible, and sustained by the ruach, or spirit, independently of the nesheme, or atmospheric air. This description affirms that the resurrection body is corporeal, not an immaterial ghost, but a real, tangible body. However, it is no longer subject to the corruption of sin and decay. This aligns with the Gospel of Philip's teaching that true flesh is distinct from ordinary flesh. The writer further connects this transformation to Jesus' own resurrection, quoting Romans 1 verse 3-4. "Born of David's seed according to the flesh, and constituted the Son of God in power by the Spirit of holiness through a resurrection from the dead." This passage highlights the distinction between the flesh according to the seed of David, mortal nature, and the glorified state Jesus attained through resurrection. The Gospel of Philip's true flesh is equivalent to this glorified, spirit-empowered body. The independence of the spiritual body. The 19th century writer continues that the spiritual body is independent of atmospheric air, for its support is clear from the ascension of the Lord Jesus. An animal body can only exist in water or in atmospheric air, and at a comparatively low altitude above the surface of the earth. Now, the air does not extend beyond 45 miles. Consequently, beyond that limit, if they could even attain to it, creatures supported by breath in the nostrils could no more live than fish in the air. Beyond our atmosphere is the ether, through which they only can pass, who, like the Lord Jesus and the angels, possess a nature adapted to it. This commentary reinforces the idea that true flesh is fundamentally different from our current bodies. While an earthly body requires air to survive, the spiritual body is sustained by the Spirit. This supports the Gospel of Philip's claim that our present flesh is only an image of the true, rather than the final, perfected state. Jesus was changed into a spirit and was therefore enabled to pass through it to the right hand of the Majesty in the heavens. This statement connects to the Gospel of Philip's assertion that Jesus' resurrection body was not the same as before. He underwent a transformation, attaining true flesh, a body adapted for divine existence. Jesus' post-resurrection body, flesh and bones, not blood. The spiritual body is constituted of flesh and bones vitalized by the Spirit. This appears from the testimony concerning Jesus. On a certain occasion, he unexpectedly stood in the midst of his disciples, at which they were exceedingly alarmed, supposing they beheld a spirit, or phantasm, as at a former time. But that they might be assured that it was really he himself, he invited them to handle him, and examine his hands and feet. For, said he, a spirit hath not flesh and bones as ye see me have. Luke 24:39. This directly confirms the gospel of Philip's teaching. Jesus did not rise as a mere spirit, but with true flesh, capable of being touched. However, this body was no longer dependent on blood for life. The writer explains, it is a bloodless body, for in the case of Jesus, he had poured out his blood upon the cross. The life of the animal body is in the blood, but not so that of the spiritual body. The life of this resides in that mighty power which suspends the earth upon nothing, and is diffused through the immensity of space. This corresponds to 1 Corinthians 15:45. The first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Jesus' resurrection body was no longer animated by blood, but by divine power. The Gospel of Philip calls this true flesh, indicating that the real human body is not the one sustained by perishable elements, but the one transformed by the Spirit. Conclusion: true flesh and the spiritual body. 1. The Gospel of Philip teaches that Jesus' resurrection body was true flesh, a perfected, incorruptible body distinct from ordinary mortal flesh. 2. The 19th century writer confirms that the spiritual body is tangible and material, yet incorruptible and sustained by the Spirit rather than blood. 3. Jesus' post-resurrection body demonstrated this transformation, as seen in Luke 24:39 and John 20:27, where he invited his disciples to touch him. 4. The distinction between current flesh and true flesh is echoed in Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians 15:53, which states that mortality must put on immortality. Ultimately, true flesh represents the glorified, imperishable body that believers will receive in the resurrection. The Gospel of Philip affirms that Christ's risen body was the model of what is to come, transforming our current perishable flesh into the perfect spiritual body.
Coming in from the captain.
Scott here, Captain.
Good news, Mr. Scott. The Armenians have agreed to the establishment of full normal diplomatic relations.
Mr. Fox would be glad to hear about that.
They've also extended an invitation to all personnel to come ashore for shore leave. They've assured me that our people will have a wonderful time.
Captain. Yes, Mr. Scott.
All personnel?
All personnel. We'll transport up trained Armenians to assume support positions. Those are my orders, Mr. Scott.